Hey, everyone. Welcome back to another great episode of So You're Ready to Date. Last week, we got down and dirty and went into the sex talk. And so this week, we're going to back up a little bit.
Okay,
And
I'm going to stop you here because last week wouldn't have been our sex talk. Last week would have been Valentine's Day if we're going in order of how it is.
oh, that's not how it was there in the thing. Okay, I'll start over and you can just cut out the
So
front.
I
And then we
think
can
if I
talk about
remember
sex.
right, it goes Valentine's Day, vulnerability, and then sex.
Oh, so you will move this back up and put it before. Okay, I didn't move. Okay, gotcha. I won't
Yeah.
even.
I mean, we can switch them around, but we have to have, I think, that Valentine's Day one there because it's like right before. So,
Yes. No, I was just thinking that you would post this one after the sex talk. We're good. I'll just not do it. No, it's fine.
Okay.
We're good.
All right. I'm sorry. I misunderstood then because I thought we were keeping it in the same order.
No, that's fine. We will.
Okay.
We'll keep it in the same order.
Sorry. All right. Take two, right?
Okay, deep breath. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to another great episode of So You're Ready to Date. We have another juicy topic for you today that I think is one that a lot of people find when they get into a relationship can sometimes be a stumbling block. So we just want to put it out there and want to talk about it because it's another one of those topics that's a little bit hard. And what we're going to be talking about today is vulnerability, what that means, and how you can take down some of those walls in your relationship and let yourself be vulnerable and feel vulnerable and find that deeper connection with the significant other that you may have recently found or may still be on the hunt for.
Right. So to kick things off, we thought it would be helpful if we started with kind of like a broad definition of what vulnerable is so that we're all on the same page kind of going forward. So according to Merriam-Webster, the dictionary, vulnerable is capable of being physically or emotionally wounded, open to attack or damage, which I get sounds counterintuitive to something that you want more of in your life and in your relationship. But we all know that that is one of the risks that we take when we assume that going on this journey of finding our person, finding that partner, finding that relationship, that there could be this potential for wounding. There could be this intention to be hurt, whether it's done intentionally or not, that's kind of one of the risks we sign up for. So we want to talk a little bit more about if you don't have it in your relationship, why not? How can you create more of that? But maybe how you can see this as being a good thing in potential relationships.
I think back to some of the past relationships that I've had going way back, or some of the other relationships that I get into now where I don't feel safe. I don't feel safe to be myself. You know, when you kind of go into a room with a group of people and they're not your tribe, and you put these walls up and you put on this fake smile to fit in, and you don't really let anybody see inside of you. What we're going to be talking about today is how to maybe tear down those walls and find that level of comfort to just be yourself and not feel like you have to put on your armor to go into the world or to come into your home and go into your relationship, and how that looks and kind of what that looks like. And before we kind of even get started, I know a lot of the stuff that's going to come out of my mouth is going to be by somebody that I highly respect and who studies vulnerability. So a lot of this information is probably stemming from things that I have learned from Dr. Brene Brown. So if you guys don't know who that is and are interested in more information on vulnerability after this podcast episode, go check her out. She's got lots of great information. She is a vulnerability researcher and she's written several books and has a lot of great information. So I just want to put that out there because I know I'm probably going to talk about a lot of the stuff that comes from her work and her material.
Well, and she has such a beautiful way of presenting it so that it makes a little bit of sense and that you don't feel attacked for not maybe having some of this in your life. But you mentioned something that I think is kind of almost the cornerstone to this vulnerability, and that's safety. And that is, do you feel safe in your relationships to be your true self? Because I think you hit on a point that a lot of us have is we have that going outside and meeting people mask, and we have that, real us for when we're around the people that we truly trust and feel safe around. And yes, it can be exhausting. And do you ever fully get rid of having like masks for certain events? I don't think so. I think that's just the way life works sometimes. But in those intimate, close relationships, do you feel safe enough to be able to share all parts of you with that person so that you feel seen and heard in your entirety, and that you don't have to play act and be who you think this person wants you to be, because that can be exhausting in and of itself too.
Yes, it can be totally exhausting in and of itself. And one of the ways that I gauge how I'm feeling is, how do I react when my feelings are hurt? How do I react? Because we've all got triggers and we all respond to things different, and we all see life through our own perception. So sometimes your partner is going to say or do things that may unintentionally hurt your feelings. And you may know that they did not intentionally hurt your feelings, but your feelings are hurt nonetheless. How do you respond when that happens? Do you feel comfortable going and having a conversation? And in that conversation, are you creating a safe space for your partner to not be defensive about that? Or is that conversation standoffish? And do you feel like it's something that's going to lead to an argument? And for me, in my relationships, that's been a really good gauge for me about how I feel and whether or not I'm allowing myself to be vulnerable with someone.
Ooh, if I say that, are they going to get defensive and turn it around on me? And is it better just to not bring it up at all and tell myself to quote unquote get over it and move on? Because is it really that big a deal? So again, sometimes it's about having those uncomfortable conversations where you shouldn't necessarily have to tiptoe around whatever you need to bring up with somebody. Hopefully you can create a relationship where you can say, hey, I know you didn't probably mean anything by it, but when you said this, this, and this, it really made me feel X, Y, or Z. And to know that you have the ability to say those things without somebody turning it back around and being like, yeah, well, remember when you did this 3 months ago? Because now I'm going to throw that back into you. So it's feeling safe enough to tell people these things and to have these conversations without that fear of retaliation, without that fear of it's going to be thrown back at me at some sort of argument 6 months down the road. And I know that it's a running joke for a lot of guys that women just hold on to everything and they remember every little thing that you did wrong. I think it can go both ways. But I think sometimes if we don't feel safe enough in a relationship to be able to have these conversations as they come up, then yes, in 6 months, when I've been dealing with a buildup of all of these things, then it may come out in this avalanche of here's everything you've done wrong for the last 6 months that I couldn't tell you, but now you've pushed me too far. So you're getting it all.
Right. When that one little drop goes into the cup and spills over, and then everything comes flying out. My ex used to call it my Rolodex, and he's like, watch out, the cards are flying. And that was true. And I didn't understand, because at the time I was much, much younger when this used to be a thing. And it was before I had any of this personal development. And I would hold things in and say, I'm a really laid back person. Not much bothers me. And then you would do the one thing that would overflow the cup, and everything would come out that he had no idea that he had done wrong for the past 6 months, or sometimes for the past 2 years, or whatever that may be. And so that was one of the ways that's one of the things that you can look at in order to increase that safety container, is having conversations on a more regular basis instead of pushing it down and trying to bury it and cover it up, because that hill is growing underneath that rug, and pretty soon that rug can't hide it.
Right. It's like eventually that mound under the rug gets big enough that everybody's going to trip over it. So there's no more going around it. You're just smacking it.
We're just going to sculpt it into an elephant and put it right in the middle of the room.
Exactly.
And, I think about it. It's interesting. This podcast episode comes at exactly the right time because I had this conversation with my significant other just last night. There was a situation that happened a couple days ago. Well, wasn't immediate. And I had mentioned some things on the phone in kind of a joking manner. And I got no response from my significant other. And it I just kept going during the conversation, but afterwards it was one of those things where it was just eating at me and bothering me. He didn't acknowledge the fact that I was flirting or the fact that I was trying to have that conversation with him. And at that point, I started to reflect on, well, why didn't he? Is it me? Is it something about me? And of course, I had the option of pushing it down and just ignoring it. And I thought about doing that. I've done it in the past. We just talked about the drop that spills over. But I sat back and I said, no, I think I need to address this. So we had that conversation last night because we have worked to create a container where both of us can bring our walls down and have that conversation. And it doesn't always work, and we still get tripped up over things, and there's still moments and times and certain subjects. But as far as that goes, that was kind of a big moment in recognizing, sitting back and saying, okay, when I work at creating a safe container, it can happen and it can help.
Right. But like you said, work. I know it's always one of those things like, geez, again, we have to. No, but I think it is this work because I had a conversation with the guy I've been seeing this week actually about this as well. And we were, we try to, when we have like only brief chunks of time together, when we like sit down and have like coffee, that we each bring like questions that we want to ask. And just in talking, he mentioned that I am his safe space and that he feels like he can come to me with anything, that the minute he walks in the door and he knows that I'm there, that a lot of the stress and what he's worrying about melts away, and that he feels like he can tell me anything. This is still relatively new, but we've kind of fast tracked a lot of stuff because we've had these like really deep conversations, because we've been asking hard questions of each other to create this space where you can share what you need to share. I'm going to hold it in a non-judgmental space. Is that always easy? No. There are some times that there have been conversations we've had that have triggered me thinking, am I going to be enough for him? Am I going to? So it's about creating that space, but also knowing that it's not necessarily about you. It's about that other person, and hopefully creating enough openness between the two of you that if, like Angie said, if something starts to bug you, you can bring it back up in a couple of days saying, hey, I don't know why this is still bothering me, but can we talk about it again? Because sometimes you need that clarity of space. You need a couple of days of letting your brain work on it, letting things just kind of stew and marinate so that you can come back and talk about it. I don't want to say in a more productive way, but maybe with all of your thoughts in order so that you can finally, like, maybe once and for all, bury it and be done with it.
Clarity, clear is kind, and letting people know what those expectations are builds up trust, and being able to bring stuff to the table builds up trust and builds up that sense of safety. One of the things that I want to address here, though, is if you want more space in your relationship for vulnerability and more a bigger sense of trust and safety in your relationships, you can't wait for the other person to do it. It's got to be mutual, right? But what energy you're putting out is the energy that you're going to get back. So this is work that you can do personally with or without the help of your partner. And if you are not in a space where you can do that with your partner, you can practice that in other areas of your life to be able to bring those walls down. And I'm going to share a very personal story here. When I first got separated from my ex, I finally realized how many walls I had built up. I didn't want anybody to see my house. I didn't want anybody to see the mess of my marriage. I didn't want anybody to see, I love my kid and he is great and whatever, but he was getting into some trouble at the time because of everything that was going on. I felt like a failure as a mother. Like, I just had a lot of really big feelings about things. And as such, I distanced myself from everybody. Sure, I'd put on the mask, I'd put on the smile, and I'd pretend that everything was great. But behind closed doors, everything was a hot mess in my life. And I don't know if you've ever been there. I don't know if you can relate to that, but that's kind of the way that it was. And so when I got separated from my ex, I didn't even know where to start. I had nobody to talk to, I had nobody to kind of turn to. So I picked up my computer and I typed in how to make friends because at that time I just felt like I needed at least a friend. Anyways, one of the things that helped me is I went on couch surfing. And if you've never heard of it, it's not mainstream. A lot of people look at me and still say that I'm crazy. But I ended up starting to accept travelers into my home and hosting travelers in my home. And one of the things that really helped me, just sharing a personal story, was to be able to talk about my journey, my path, and how I got to where I was over and over again without having to see those people again, because they were people, they were there, they were listening to me, but then they were gone and I never had to see them again. I never had to talk to them again. And so it allowed me to really open up in a way that I hadn't known was missing in my life, and really start this healing journey to be able to practice vulnerability with other people in my life.
Yes. Because I think it's one of those, there's a point in my life and it comes and goes where I'm like, it feels like vulnerability is this necessary evil. The fact that I have finally stopped asking you if you really like me. So I think this point of, yes, it is scary to open yourself up and to put yourself out there, but in the grand scheme of things, that hurt has always been very minuscule to the reward that at least I have received when I'm actually truly vulnerable with people, when I open up. And this is not about meeting somebody and like dumping your baggage out for them at that very first meeting. That's not what we're saying at all. It's okay to piecemeal this. It's okay to, like, at one sitting, you talk about this and you start to slowly share something. Vulnerability is not about sharing anything and everything right away, because you have to, I think, build that rapport, build that comfort, build that relationship with each other so that you feel safe starting to talk about some of these things. But it's that first step, right? It's that first person that you invite into your house when you're like, I don't like anybody in my house. This is my safe space. This is like, when I first started seeing this guy, it was like, my house is like almost this true reflection of me. And if I invite him into my house, what if he doesn't like it and in return does not like me? Because that's what I was going to tell myself. If he didn't like my house or he complained or he said something, it was going to be a direct reflection on me as a person. Is it? No. And that didn't happen. But I think those are part of the stories that we have told ourselves to build up those walls to keep ourselves safe. Because if we can control as much of this flow of narrative as we can, then we're going to be that much safer. And I lived a lot of years thinking, as much control as I can get, I just need all the control, then I'll be safe, then everything will be fine. But what that did on the flip side was blocked a lot of maybe friendships from blossoming, blocked some maybe potential relationships from happening. So it was finding those people who you can start to share with and start to kind of like word vomit all this stuff, and them being like, okay. You're like, oh, in my head, I was thinking you were going to like string me up for all these crimes. You're like, no, it was a thing. It happened. It makes you who you are. Okay. We all have these things that we feel maybe reflect on us and make us a bad person. they could, but in the likelihood it doesn't. So it's finding, like you said, those people that you can start to share so that maybe it takes some of the scary out of the story and it doesn't make it this big thing that you can't overcome because nobody's ever going to relate to this. More people are going to relate than you could possibly imagine, I'm sure.
Yes, I totally think that people relate and we all have these similar things, but they're so taboo that we don't talk about them. So I would think in order for you to start practicing vulnerability in your life, if that's a new concept, it's think about an area that maybe you haven't been especially receptive to feedback in the past, or an area where when somebody asks you about it, you don't genuinely answer. You give a, oh, I'm great type of answer when everything may not be totally great. Now, I'm not saying that you should go dump your life story on the clerk at the, or on your waitress at the restaurant because she asks you how your day was or something like that. But I am saying, think about those places where you cover up and you put a mask over whatever you're doing in, or as Brene Brown would say, how you armor up, and how can you take a piece of that armor off? How can you lift up just a little bit and have a conversation or show your real self? Or what do you post on social media? Are you posting something on social media that looks perfect and looks like you have everything together? Or do you only post your vacation pictures and you don't post the picture when you get out of bed and have messy hair? You know, those types of things. Where do you feel uncomfortable, but just uncomfortable enough that you can take that step and start?
Well, one of the questions that this guy I've been seeing has asked me, and I think it's an interesting one. And if it's in a kind of a relationship that you want to be a little bit more intimate, he's like, tell me something that less than 10 people know about you. So sometimes there are these things that we maybe never told anybody else. And, if it's a traumatic thing, again, kind of gauge what, but there are maybe some things that you've never told anybody else that are like, I really like to collect penguins, or it doesn't have to be anything big or scary, but maybe there is something that you've been kind of holding back that might be something that connects you with this new person. Maybe they like to read obscure history novels as well, or they're really into like unicycles, or so you don't know how you're going to create better connections with people if you don't start to open up and kind of share all of those weird, quirky, interesting parts of yourself that make you the unique, wonderful person that you are.
Yes, yes. And those are all really great tips on how you can practice being vulnerable and bringing vulnerability into the relationship. So I think it's important here for the last few minutes before we have to go, before we're out of time, to maybe talk a little bit about how we can promote a safe space and improve the safety and trust in our relationship to allow our partners to be vulnerable too. Because the more vulnerable they are, the more vulnerable we are, the more vulnerable they are, and vice versa. And that will go back and forth. But there's some other things that we can do to increase the sense of trust and safety in our relationships to open that up to allow them to bring stuff to the table as well.
Yes. I think one of the most important things for me is listen and not listen to try and chime in with your story, I mean, that can definitely be part of the conversation, but initially to listen to whoever is talking with the full intent of really hearing them and understanding where they're coming from so that it doesn't feel like, oh, well, they listened as long as they could until they could start talking. So really giving people that space to talk as much as they need to talk without feeling like they're a burden.
I think that is a great piece of advice. And I saw this the other day on Facebook, and it's something that sometimes happens in our relationship too. It comes up and it's, okay, are you looking for a shoulder or a solution? Are you looking for an ear or a solution? And simply asking that question. I know the masculine energy is a fix it energy. We will when we're in that energy, or when our guys are there, or whatever, whoever takes that masculine stage in that relationship is oftentimes in that fix it mindset. So as a woman, when I come to the table with a problem that I'm facing, sometimes I need to talk it out to find solutions for myself. Sometimes I need to talk it out to really see what I'm thinking and to clarify my thoughts. And all I want is an ear. And so at that point in time, I just need you to listen. I don't need your solutions. I don't need you to fix it. You can't fix it. It's my problem. And so being clear about what you need, and asking your partner when they start talking too, are you looking for an ear, or are you looking for a solution to allow that space to just listen instead of try and solve a problem?
Right. And I don't know how necessarily this would work, but I think maybe coming to agreement that being like, what we share is what we share, and it's not ammunition. Because I think there's this idea that if I share too much, what if this comes back to me? And it can be, talking about that, but I think this is what you have to put in some action is like, yeah, when things get tough and you have an argument, you don't get to pull something that they told you in that safe space, in that bubble of us sharing, of us talking and being vulnerable. You don't get to throw that back in their face, so that you could talk about that, but that's really an action step of, this doesn't get to be ammunition for the next time you have an argument to try to hit that really good soft spot to make them really hurt. This is about creating that constant state of being comfortable enough to share everything as much as you want to, I suppose, with that person, and knowing that it's going in this vault. It doesn't get to be shared with everybody else. It's just between the two of you.
And I know we've talked about anger languages in the past, and I think you bring up a really solid point that we should spend some time on in the future and bring in a future episode, is how to fight fair, and how do you bring disagreements to the table and work through those without pulling out the Rolodex and throwing the cards everywhere, or without taking the rug off and saying, look at this mound of shit. I want you to fix all of it right now. So we'll do an episode on that, because I think that is very important in building trust, building safety in a relationship, and also being able to keep a relationship healthy, because it is important that you're able to disagree in a constructive way.
Right. And to not lose all the progress that hopefully you're making as to building that sense of safety and security and vulnerability with whoever it happens to be in your life that you're wanting to do this with.
And then another thing that you can do in order to build that sense of vulnerability and safety in a relationship is not betray your partner's confidence. If they tell you something, you don't need to go talk to all your friends about it. Don't bring it up. Don't talk about it outside of the relationship. But beyond just not telling anybody about your partner, be careful what you're bringing to your partner. Because if you come to your partner or your friend or somebody else and you start talking about the people in your life, or you start talking, let's say you go to your partner and you start talking about your best friend and start complaining about your best friend. We may not know it, we may not feel it. We think that we're connecting, but really what we're doing is, in our brain, is processing, well, they're talking about their best friend that way. Why wouldn't they talk about me that way? When your boss does that, and if your boss talks to you at work about other employees on the team, at what point do you say, okay, I can't trust my boss, because if they're talking about my teammate, they're going to be talking about me, right? So we think about that and we kind of go through that. And so I think it's important that we pay attention to what we're bringing to our partners too, and building up that trust, and knowing that if our best friend has our confidence, our coworkers have our confidence, our significant other has our confidence, and we keep that all, and we don't talk about people behind their back, and we don't share things about our partners.
Right. I think we talked about this briefly in like an episode in season 1, where it's like, all of a sudden you can't figure out why your best friend hates the guy you're dating, because all you've ever told her is all of the crap things that he has done. So you've painted a picture of him, a very specific picture of this person. So why would they like them? you never say anything nice about them. So again, it's this idea of how would it feel if your best friend's like, why are you with this guy? I'm like, but he does really great things, not according to everything you have told me. And so then all of a sudden they've got this very skewed image of this person. And maybe that's not really ultimately what you want. Is that? I mean, I wouldn't think you would want your best friend or other people to think badly of the important people in your life. And that's what can happen if all they're getting is this steady diet of what a jerk they are, how horrible she is, all of that stuff. And to think about how would you feel if all of a sudden you caught a glimpse of his group chat with the buddies and you're like, oh, I thought that was shared between us. So I think, flipping it around, being like, yeah, maybe your first instinct is to run to the group chat and be like, hey, you'll never guess what happened. But to stop and say, how would that feel if I found out he was doing the exact same thing with all of his buddies, and be like, no, that was an us thing. It needs to stay an us thing.
Right, right. And I think going back to the fair fighting, and again, we'll go into another episode, but watch your words, watch what you're saying, and make sure that you are not being nasty. We talked about not using specific instances, but avoiding pointing fingers and saying words like always and never during an argument or even during a conversation, because those automatically put up defenses and put up walls. When you say you always do something or you never do something, we are dynamic human beings and we are constantly changing. We are different people than we woke up with yesterday. And yes, the saying is most people don't change. And while that is true, people make different choices and those choices lead to different habits. So always is a long time, never is a long time. Avoid using words like always and never when you're having conversations or when you're in the middle of an argument.
That nice, nasty, where the tone is nice, but everything that comes out of your mouth is not nice.
The way we talk to our pets sometimes.
Right. Aren't you just the nicest little dipshit ever? Why the hell do you know?
Yes. And to leave everybody on a positive note here, I would also say be kind and spend some time paying attention to your partner and complimenting what they do and who they are and the good things in their life. Are you proud of them? Did they do something worth celebrating? Are they looking for praise? Did they dress nice? When you are paying attention to the good things and you are leaving the bad things at the door, because we've all got little quirks and we all annoy each other. We're human. It happens. But if you are saying 5 compliments for every one negative thing that comes out of your mouth, that's going to build a environment that's much safer. So I would say make sure that you are really paying attention to the things that you are pointing out or talking about, and that your compliment ratio is 5 to 1 or higher.
Ooh, I like that. Yeah. No, nothing cheers you up like a nice little text message saying, hey, I really liked that shirt on you this morning, or I'm so proud of you for X, Y, or Z. And yeah, it can be face to face and that's helpful too. But sometimes it's nice to have that like text message that you can go back and revisit and be like, oh, yeah. I like that. So that's a very good reminder that hopefully more kindness is coming out of your mouth and in your words than there is not so nice.
Right. So that is our challenge to you today, is to find at least 5 kind things to say to your partner in the next 24 hours to compliment them, to help them build up their sense of self and their contribution to your relationship. And drop us a line. Let us know how that worked for you. Let us know what that experience was like. You can reach us at soyou'readytodate@gmail.com. And we'll be back next week with another great episode, diving into another great topic.